Namaste everyone, my name is Dr. Chhavi Bhasin and I'm a psychiatrist. I want to be making these videos for the prevention of mental health problems. I think a lot has been said and done about treatment of mental health problems, but not enough is being done about the prevention aspect. With that aim in mind, I intend to be making these videos regularly. If that mission resonates with you, I would request you to kindly like, share, subscribe, and comment on these videos as to what other topics you would like to talk about. Share these videos with people you think could benefit from such videos, and let me know what other topics you would find interesting for such videos. With that request out of the way, because we live in a world where manpower, time, and energy and money is needed to generate more such content. So if you continue to provide us that support, we will be able to divert that kind of manpower and resources into this kind of content. Having said that, now let's dive straight into the video. Now, this video I wanted to talk about anxiety, and I've made some notes here for myself. You see, anxiety is something you would say has been talked about enough, and you're right. So many people, so many celebrities talk about anxiety. So many people talk about their experiences of psychiatry. Uh, so many people speak about their experiences in anxiety. We have doctors and experts talk about the ways to manage anxiety, and I think social media is inundated with such data and information. We also know that the medication usage for the management of mental health problems, including anxiety, has gone up in the last few decades. And as someone who is personally saddened by the increase in usage of medications, and as someone who feels rather passionate about there being lack of support out there for prevention of mental health problems, I wanted to make these videos. So today's video, I'm not going to be talking about things about anxiety which have already been spoken about enough, about which there is ample information available out there, but instead I wish to be focusing on things which are not talked about enough as far as anxiety is concerned. So the first one, let's say, is nature and its absence in our life and its correlation with anxiety. Now, I've had many patients in my work life where they have told me, when I was exploring their history in detail, that they could actually put a marker on the fact that whenever they found themselves uprooting themselves from areas where they had ample exposure to nature, where they were exposing themselves to green spaces, to huge gardens of their own, or they had places to go out for walks, or in general had ample abundant exposure to the blue of the sky and the green of the trees and the brown of the mud and the soil, is when they weren't as anxious or they didn't have anxiety at all. Now, it would require a great deal of observation and a great deal of detail to dive into these correlations and chronological aspects, but often you will find that in your case as well, that whenever you have reduced your exposure to nature, whenever you've reduced your presence in nature, you would be able to clearly delineate that that's the time when you've either found anxiety walking into your life, or you have felt that the anxiety has gone up. Now, it may be that you were earlier a child and you were playing out a lot, and playing out in a garden or some sort of place where there were green spaces, ample sunlight, ample blue skies. Because sadly, whilst we talk a lot about physical activity, I think we don't really talk enough about the absence of nature in our lives. We work very much indoors these days. There isn't much sunlight coming in, there isn't much natural air falling on our skin. And that needs to be delineated in that yes, there is an aspect that the physical activity levels tend to go down when we reach adulthood for a lot of us, because we take on roles in offices which requires a great deal of seating. But alongside, what also gets away from us is that we aren't out and about as much, and so the sunlight or the blue skies aren't really getting into our systems as much as they used to earlier. And contrarily, I've had many patients in my clinic walk in and tell me that for some reason, because of some things not, fitting in life, they've had taken calls of moving out to or moving back to places where they had plenty of natural exposure, or which entailed being out and about more often, or which entailed exposure to natural light, natural air, or they had exposure to spaces like having living rooms or balconies where they were spending more time out and about, and which did have a lot of natural air and light coming in, or did give them an opportunity to have sight of green spaces, that they started to feel better as far as their anxiety is concerned. And this is such one of those things that just doesn't get noticed enough or observed enough by a lot of professionals, or even by the patients, because I think somewhere we have internalized that it is almost vital to locate to cities, and I can see why and how, but equally it takes us away from our anthropological and our evolutionary leanings, which require us to be out and about in green spaces. So people might come after me, especially the trained and educated doctors and psychiatrists, that she's oversimplifying the issue. We know that there are chemical imbalances and genetic factors leading to anxiety. And I'm in no way retorting to that, that of course there are genetic predispositions, of course there are chemical imbalances, but it's high time in the juncture of our evolution that we actually question where the chemical imbalances are coming from. It's high time we dive into the anthropological and evolutionary perspectives as to why the rate and incidence of anxiety disorders has gone up suddenly in the last few years. And we have to look at every possible postulate, every possible factor. We have to examine every possible change that has come about in our lives in last few decades, which can corroborate with the increase in the incidence of mental health problems. So yes, of course, there are genetic predispositions, of course, there are chemical imbalances, but what we really need to question is what all are the factors which are leading to the generation of these chemical imbalances and the rise in mental health problems. And I personally feel that the absence of nature in our lives is certainly one such factor. And whilst we have not as intricately and delicately studied this correlation, there is still evidence, because we know that there is evidence when there is ecotherapy, which is essentially spending more time out and about in nature, that the impact of anxiety goes down, or the prevalence of anxiety goes down. So we do have some indirect evidence in that form, which can't really be ignored. We are meant to live in close proximity and harmony with nature, and that has really changed because of industrialization, population increase. We gravitate to cities, there are cramped spaces, there is housing crisis. We're practically living in boxes where we can peek out from our balcony if we are lucky enough to not even see enough blue sky. I'd go so far as to say that it is feasible that when our brains don't have these in the picture, the natural landscape that our brains so crave, it is likely to send stress, as in the past such circumstances would have been surely stressful for the human species, because it would have meant a natural calamity that the humans are not being able to experience the full natural abundant landscape. So we need to speak enough about the presence of nature around us and understand that nature is healing. And it is because we are supposed to be in the midst of nature and not broken away in a box. Spending enough time in nature is likely to prevent anxiety and even likely to help with reduction in anxiety. And as a group, as a species, humans will have to, at some stage, strive for building our presence within nature rather than wiping it off. Anxiety management is just one more reason to be environmentally conscious, I would say. So that was the first factor. The second factor, I would say, is exercise, of course. And I know that a lot of people have already spoken about anxiety, but I'd say that exercise is not just a way to manage anxiety. In fact, absence of exercise actually could be possibly resulting in the genesis of anxiety in the first place, is a hypothesis that I am putting forth. Now, similar to the nature and our presence within it, we have to understand that exercise is called exercise now, but it was merely physical exertion and movement, which was just a very natural and mandatory way of life not too long back in our history of evolution. Have you noticed that babies don't really relax much. They're, moving about. Look at the toddlers, the infants, they're moving about, tossing about, playing about. You don't see them relaxing a lot outside of the time when they are asleep for maybe 10 to 12 to 14 hours in a day. We have to understand that all the comfort and the chair jobs are very recent in our history of evolution, and so we're not really meant to live that way. So, cognitively, at the level of our brain, we may tell ourselves that this is very much needed, but subconsciously and almost evolutionarily, our bodies aren't quite capable of coming to terms with this reality that has crept into our lives. And my contention is that if we suggest medications work, and hence there is causal hypothesis of chemical deficiency to cause anxiety, then by the same logic, don't we have ample evidence to say that lack of physical activity causes anxiety? For those who wish to question the mechanism of the same, I really have no answers as to how it really comes about. Could it be rooted in the balance between the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system of the body? Possibly. Could it be rooted elsewhere, something that we don't even know about enough as medical professionals? Possibly. But what I can say that it is almost a side effect free method of checking it out for ourselves if our anxiety responds to physical activity or not. And I have to confess again and again that as doctors, we don't know a lot about how our bodies work, and especially the focus is on studying illnesses and not much on the healthy physiology. And the large part of our education, the focus is not on preventing mental illnesses. So, as a population, if moving about helps with physical health problems, let's add to the list that we have additional benefit of a reduction in anxiety in the population, and let that fortify our argument for policies to incorporate at the level of government policies, policies at work, and allowing enough time through the day for physical activity. So I'm making a case for absence of physical activity could possibly be the cause of genesis of anxiety in some individuals. The third factor I want to talk about is that your anxiety experience may be a marker of a different brain that you carry. Yes, I said it. What do I mean by a different brain? You see, most brains are neurotypical brains, and they are in majority, and so tend to have majority influence in how the world runs and what the expectations from humans are and how they feel and conduct themselves and think, how they perceive the world. This happens at a very implicit level. These are not some explicit laid out rules. But anyone who's got a brain which is different than the majority, what we call as a neurodivergent brain, they think differently. They may perceive things differently. They may have very, very vastly different sets of strengths and weaknesses. And so their brains are wired so differently, and they may have things like autism or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or sometimes both of them, that they tend to feel constantly alienated or internally struggling with rejection and fear, which may sometimes manifest as anxiety disorders. And so I think one of the things that's not talked about enough in the terms of factors which lead to anxiety is being wired differently in the brain. And I think if you're visiting a psychiatrist or a psychologist, it is imperative that you insist on being tested or being evaluated for the presence of autism or attention deficit hyperactivity, because chances are that if you are in the minority of individuals whose brains are wired differently, that even if you keep getting medicated or therapized for anxiety, your anxiety wouldn't respond as well, because the basic framework, the basic bedrock of what is leading to the genesis of anxiety has not been addressed. So that's the third factor which doesn't get talked about enough. Check out if you might be a neurodivergent person. So you need to ask your psychiatrist or psychologist if you may be on the autism spectrum or may have significant attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. The idea is not labeling, the idea is not medicating either, and the idea is really comprehension in capital letters. Sometimes people say we don't really need labels, and I dislike such claims. The reason is we do need labels, and we need labels to help the people who get the labels, because I know Shakespeare said, what's in a name? But there's a lot in a name, there's a lot in nomenclature. We don't need to call a mango, but yes, we do need to call a mango, because there are many places in the world who may not have had mangoes few years back because it's a tropical fruit. And so in order to know what a mango is, what it looks like, what it feels like, what it tastes like, where does it grow, why does it grow where it grows, we need to have a name, a label to go and look it up in a book, a thesaurus, or nowadays internet. And so labels are very important. Labels are important not for discrimination and stigmatization, which sadly they have been used for. Labels are important for accurate description. Labels are important for accurate comprehension. Labels are important for accurate lines of research. And so, in this particular case, I think what's not been talked about enough when it comes to anxiety disorders is that sometimes some individuals are clearly harboring autism or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, which sadly gets manifested as anxiety and then gets wrongly diagnosed as anxiety with not much benefit, and people have lost decades of their lives to this sort of a misdiagnosis. So let's not underestimate the importance of these labels. The fourth important factor that I wanted to talk about was uh, meditation and journaling. Now, I know this is one of those boring topics, isn't it? I mean, so much is being talked about meditation and journaling. Um, but what I really want to emphasize on as a trained psychiatrist and as somebody who's had experience of seeing patients who have struggled with anxiety disorders for years and years, I can tell you that meditation and journaling are very effective ways of managing anxiety. Now, when I'm talking about these less talked about topics about anxiety, I'm not trying to undermine the importance of medication. I'm not trying to undermine the importance of therapy. I'm in fact saying that yes, those two things are being talked about enough on social media platforms. What's not being talked about enough is that meditation and journaling are very, very legitimate ways of managing anxiety. And I think the problem with meditation is that sadly the word meditation has almost lost its meaning, and the reason for that is that it's been misused so much that we've not really understood that meditation is a very simple thing. It's not all that complicated as it has been made out to be in the last few decades, sadly, with all the narrative and discourse around it on social media platforms. What is meditation? It's simply an exercise of dedicating time, energy, and space on a daily basis, if not daily, on a regular basis, even if it's just for 5 to 10 to 15 minutes, in just being. You're not really focusing on any activity, you're not forcing your brain to focus on something, you are not even focusing on resisting any of the thoughts and feelings and pains. You're just being. So when you dedicate some space, some time, some energy in daily part of your lives, but even if it's just for 15 minutes, where the emphasis is on just being with yourself, with your body and with your brain just as is, rather than forcing anything and resisting anything, that is just meditation. And you may wonder, what is the relevance of meditation in the management of anxiety? And to that, I would say that empty spaces are very important to bring out a beautiful painting. And silence is very important for music, because there is no music without silence. You see, the notes have to be put on the backdrop of silence for the music to make any sense, for the music to have any meaningful language, or for any meaningful impact on our sensibilities. And meditation is, in the similar sense, offering that blank canvas, that blank space to our psyche, to our brain, to our body, as a very, very vital part of our lives. And so when that is given appropriately, adequately, on a regular basis to our bodies and brains, the impact is there to see. Of course, we can again go into the mechanism of all of that, that maybe it's to do with the balance between the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system in the body, which results in the benefits of meditation. But maybe it's deeper than that. Who is to know? We can have long debates and discourses about the mechanisms, but it's a cheap, almost an inexpensive, effective, and almost readily available method of managing our anxiety. You see, again, much like I've delved into the anthropological and evolutionary aspects of um, our contact with nature, our connect with nature, or our body's needs to move about and not just sit about in chairs. In the similar vein, actually, our brains, our bodies, our whole being is designed to crave and seek and desire some empty spaces, where we're not really doing anything, we're not really chasing anything, where we're just being. And I know that sadly a lot of people feel this pressure of thoughtlessness that they need to attain in meditation, but that's not the case. It will come about at some stage, maybe it will not come about, it will take a little longer in some individuals, doesn't really matter. It's the idea is to be able to have that incorporation in your life of that space where you're not doing, chasing, resisting anything. You just sit in one space and sit with yourself as you are. That's what meditation is. And in a similar sense, you might wonder that how do I explain journaling as an anthropological requirement or as an evolutionary requirement? Well, you see, when we lived as tribes, there was this whole notion of sitting together in the evening outside the fire. And I know I'm kind of romanticizing it, but humans have a need of pouring their hearts out. It may be done with a friend, it may be done with a therapist, it may be done with our own selves, with our diaries, or it may be done in a large group as part of culture and dance and music. But it is a vital aspect. Expression is a vital aspect, not just for human. Expression is a vital aspect for all species. Of course, it happens in myriad forms and colors in nature, which we can interpret and study. But when it comes to humans, it's a vital need, and the more we deny it to ourselves, the more there is suppression, and the more there is trauma, and the more there is crowding of things in our psyche, which can contribute to the genesis of anxiety in some individuals. So we have to be very mindful of the fact that that need of expression, of outpouring, has to get captured someplace. And with the kind of lives that we live, for all sorts of reasons, sometimes it's not possible to go for therapy, sometimes it's not possible to open up to our close friends, and in fact even then there will still be feelings and emotions and thoughts and desires which can't really come out in those kind of interactions. And so the best paradigm for that would be to sit with yourself with a diary where you can write things, or with your phone on a journal app where you can journal things by typing. It doesn't really matter. Or even if you like recording. The idea is to remove the crowding up here, so that new stuff can go in, so to speak, so that you can park your thoughts, so to speak, so that they're not just going about in circles in your brain, and so that when it comes out on paper, sometimes you can make sense of it. And often a lot of my friends actually tell me, oh, come on, it feels very infantile, very juvenile to sit with our diaries and write our thoughts, dear diary, this is how I felt today, she broke my heart. No, you don't have to do that. Again, much like meditation, it's about giving that time, that energy, that space, that discipline to yourself, that no matter what, I will sit with a pen and a paper or my phone journal app and will try and write something that comes to me during those 5 to 10 to 15 minutes, however many minutes you have dedicated in your daily life for the journaling. And I will do that. And I will almost claim that in few days' time, most of you will start writing more than you did earlier. Most of you would be able to overcome the resistance or the disinterest that you had in pouring your thoughts and feelings out. And it just works miraculously. Again, we can delve into the mechanism of how diary writing helps and how diary writing helps with the reduction in anxiety. But mechanism aside, I can tell you anecdotally there is evidence, and there is some scientific evidence as well, that those who journal regularly are likely to have less anxiety symptoms. And the mechanism, I started off the conversation and left it in between. Maybe I should just finish that as well. I would say mechanism might just be that you get your thoughts out, so there's no crowding happening in there, constantly feeding into your neural circuits. Or it could be that when the thoughts come out in their raw form and they get articulated, a story or a narrative generates from it, which takes a meaningful linear form, which then becomes a little more easier for your brain to process and handle. Maybe that is the reason why journaling helps. There could be other reasons too, but at the moment I really could think of those two possible reasons. But yes, that's the other thing I wanted to talk about that's not talked about enough, is that meditation and journaling are very, very effective means of managing anxiety. And none of these claims from my side are that if you do this, if you are out and about in nature, if you're exercising, if you are doing meditation and journaling, you're surely going to have alleviation of anxiety. But like I said, the reason why I make these videos is to focus on the preventive aspects of anxiety. And so my postulates, my hypotheses are based in the intention of hopefully being able to bring together a multitude of factors which are easy to work with in terms of populations rather than individuals, and hopefully will give us some meaningful results in the reduction of mental health problems in future. With that in mind, I will move on to the next important, last important bit about anxiety disorders that I wanted to talk about, which will be actually, no, the second last point that I wanted to talk about, which is that food. We've all talked about food and diet enough. We know what good food is, bad food is, what kind of food helps us, what kind of food doesn't help us. But what we don't talk about enough is that the quality of food, whether it is nutrient rich or not, whether it is micronutrient dense or not, what kind of food do we use to derive our calories from, what kind of food might we be allergic to, how many times do we need to eat, are we putting enough fiber in our diet, is the fiber related to gut bacteria. All of those factors in terms of our food choices also all happens to have a correlation with the genesis of anxiety disorders. Sorry. And while I know that a lot of people talk about food enough as it is these days for the management of our physical health, but I felt that it's not talked about enough in its correlation with mental health problems, especially anxiety disorders. So I wanted to add that point to this narrative.